a lot of the work that Ken Leithwood's been doing here, Vivian Robinson's been doing, Ken Rowe is doing, is making, like, I know it's a simplistic contrast to say there are two kinds of leaders. It's not. There's many more, but it kind of works. And they looked at the transformational leader that came out of the business work in the 1960s and 70s from the big commercial companies about having principals lead schools around a common vision. Getting every teacher onto the same page, the kids on the same page about what this vision is, obviously aspirational, making sure you create time and space for teachers to realise that vision. Contrasted with what is called the instructional leader, where your job is to worry about the impact that the adults are having on the kids in that school. That often means looking at the test scores. And it means going beyond that and creating discussions and having professional development sessions about how do we know we're having an impact? Is the impact good enough? And when you look at Vivian Robinson's meta-analysis on this, it's chalk and cheese difference in terms of the impact on kids. Yes, transformational learning, principalship, has about a 0.15 effect. It's positive. But it's almost criminal relative to the 0.6 effect that instructional leaders have. And then when I go to the next step, and in Australia, and I've done now, it's been done in New South Wales, is what percentage of principals and leaders are of those two kinds. The instructional one, about 5 to 10%. Now, I have a hunch in Ontario, you have been through sufficient change that you have a lot higher percentage of instructional leaders. Now, I know the difference between two is not the answer, but it's not a bad polarity. Like distributed leadership, it's not in there compared to the power of the instructional. And again, it comes back to the mind frames notion, the mindsets. What mindset do you want the principal to have? Is it about what is the impact that the people in the school are having? And like in a high school, you'd want to devolve that and distribute it. But you want constantly to ask that question. Are we having an impact? Is it worthwhile? Is it sufficient? That's a lot harder than having a discussion, are we having the same vision? Have you got the right resources? So I think that instructional leadership is a very powerful notion, and that's certainly one that I care about the most. Yeah, look, the parallel with the mind frames with teachers is very, very close. It's principals who think their fundamental role is to be the chief evaluators of what's happening in their school. They don't have to do it, but their role is to understand their impact. The role of the principal is to be the lead change agent. It is the case that the principals, the leadership's more than principals, of course, but the principal's job, which I'm talking about now, often their job is more with the teachers than it is with the students. But it's about the same agenda. The impact the teachers are having on the students collectively. How to create that dialogue in the school. It is about them understanding that fundamentally it is about interpretation of that effect. It is about how we can have multiple ways of teaching kids, knowing which kids we have to be aware of, to find different ways of teaching them, and giving teachers different strategies. It's about creating dialogues and discussion across the staff that is about our teaching and not about the resources or about the curriculum or about the incidentals that are happening in the school. Those are huge responsibilities and tasks. And I think that those things really come to, it's about also, and this is the hard one, it's about identifying in defensible ways when high impact is happening and being prepared to back it, wherever it is. Now that's not necessary, I'm deliberately not saying a teacher, I'm saying where you see it, because it is the case that as a teacher, sometimes I have high impact, sometimes I don't. Now it is the case, take tennis for example. Roger Federer has good days and bad days. But overall, I'd back him as a potential to winner. Same with teachers. Like, there are Roger Federers out there, and some days they have bad days. But I still don't want to go away from the notion that we have some teachers who systematically, regularly have high impact. I want to drive a school by success. I want to be known as the leader of the school of identifying in dependable ways, which means I have to expose that to colleagues. That it's not because they're the senior teacher, it's not because they're the teacher that follows the same kind of philosophy I have, but I have evidence that I'm prepared to show in dependable ways. Another thing I want to identify is teachers who are prepared to have that language of impact and drive schools by that. Like, I worked once for a vice-chancellor who came out of the business community. He was a CEO of a very large company. He came into the university, he'd never been an academic. He turned out, in my experience, to be one of the best vice presidents of a university I've ever worked with. And I was talking to him one day about the kind of things I was doing, and he said, do you realise in business, if you get 20% of the market, you have a monopoly? Now, that was very sobering for me, because I used to go into schools and think my job was to change the school. Now, I think my job now is to get 20%. And if I get 20%, I've got the school. Now, of course, I want to go it up. Now, I work with a school at the moment where it took 3 years to go from 20% to 40%. And I work with a school and they say, are they ever going to get there? Well, I'm saying, you're actually there. A critical mass is what you need. You're not going to ever get 100%. That's a rare school, delightful school when you do so. And it does take sometimes 2 or 3 years to get teachers to work along the kind of visible learning ways we're talking. And so I think, when's good enough? When is it good enough? I think it's the thing we need to ask. I think that, of course, in our profession, unlike the business community, we reinvent the problem every year. A new cohort comes in. The fact that you in Ontario can take a new cohort every year and get them up to that standard every year is stunning. How do we, as leaders, identify, esteem, value, and work from that success?